we're speaking with Diane Francis, who is one of the scions of Canadian journalism, and she has been writing for a half a century about geopolitics and economics and how they interrelate. She's got some great insights with what's going on with President Trump, his bluster, his negotiation, as well as with Ukraine. You won't want to miss this. Stick around. This is Make Better Wealth Decisions, a podcast about financial blind spots, decision-making, and how the reality of higher rates, global tensions, and tariff instability impact your investments. I'm your host, John DeGuy, a portfolio manager with Design Securities in Toronto. My guest this week is Diane Francis. She writes about world events, trends, and leaders from a big picture perspective that connects the dots. She's a columnist and editor-at-large for the National Post in Canada. And she also writes for the Kyiv Post in Ukraine, the Ukraine Alert, and the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center in Washington, D.C., not to mention Huffington Post, Washington Post, and others. She publishes a twice-weekly Substack newsletter about geopolitics and has readers in 106 countries around the world. It's my pleasure to welcome you today. Diane, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm also well. I'd love to see if we can start by just talking about how you started off as a financial journalist, but you've morphed into doing more geopolitical things where you connect the dots. How did it come to be that you started in one and morphed into the other?
Well, I've been a journalist for 50 years, and I was based in Canada. I'm originally American. So by definition, I'm kind of a globally interested, savvy person, and, holding two citizenships. And during my time and career as a journalist, I worked for newspapers, and then I became the first female editor of the equivalent of the Wall Street Journal in Canada. And I traveled all over the world. I mean, the only country of any importance that I haven't been to is Australia. And I would go for weeks at a time and get immersed. Ukraine, of course, became an important story because I have a lot of Ukrainian friends. I live in Toronto. My first trip was in 1991. I was the first Western journalist to interview the first president of an independent Ukraine, President Kravchuk. And a friend of mine came with me, translated, and then we both realized that because they'd left the Soviet Union and were orphaned, that we better do what we can to help them. So he and I started the first Chamber of Commerce. We founded the Canadian-Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce. Then we did trade missions back and forth. We invested in businesses, got burned by corruption. I've made 30 trips there. And, I'm very dedicated to Ukraine. And I knew even in 91 that even though they did so-called declared independence, that they were going to end up being the line in the sand of the new Cold War. And that's exactly what's happened. It was predictable. And so I've done that with other countries. I've also immersed myself in Mexico, same kind of, journey for a country to try and become a capitalist democracy and that sort of thing. So been all over Asia, been in Africa, all over Europe, covered the Berlin Wall coming down, Mandela coming out of prison. It's been a ride. Wow. And so it's sort of given me enough of a base of information and experience to be able to stand back and to write about geopolitics, but not through a keyhole.
It's a fascinating life story and a wonderful career. I wonder if we could maybe dovetail into the podcast that I'm running here, which is called Make Better Wealth Decisions. And it seems to me that decision-making is fraught with so many interconnected and consequential unknowns. And that's especially true today. So how would you recommend people think about the world as it exists in 2025 and all the geopolitical uncertainty that's part of it?
I started off as a general news reporter, and then I got deeply involved into being a business writer and an economics writer. And politics is not really of interest to me. I'm not crazy about politicians from any country, frankly. I like numbers, I like logic, I like rationality, I like facts. And I know that money makes the world go round. People don't like to hear that, but that's the facts. So my newsletter has been described by one professor at Columbia as the best geoeconomics newsletter in the world. So that's to your point. And when I was covering business and so on, when I wanted to know, as a reporter, more information about pick a country, Turkey or Pakistan, I would call an investment banking analyst who covered that area, and they know more about what's going on in a country than any politicians or any journalists going. Why? Because they're making dollar decisions on whether to buy the bonds, sell the bonds, buy the stock, sell, or get involved in the private investment in that country. So I realized that was really one of the most important pillars underlying how you should invest, is knowing what's going on. And, so you don't get burned. And now, if you strictly stick with the U.S., even then you have to know what politically is going on in the U.S. to avoid the pitfalls and, investing in certain companies and de-investing.
A lot of people say follow the money when it comes to almost anything. And certainly that's what I'm hearing you say as well. Do you think most investors have really processed what it means to have the U.S. credit rating being downgraded, wherever that was a month and a half or 2 months ago, and the U.S. having a $37.1 trillion accumulated debt? Are these the sorts of numbers that ordinary investors are thinking about when they make their investment decisions?
Well, if they're investing in bonds, of course they have to. If they're investing in stocks, they don't have to. If they're investing outside the States, they don't have to. If they're investing inside the States, maybe with foreign money, yes, they have to. So it just depends on your particular situation. But there are some broader brush issues that people should be aware of. For instance, with all the blah, blah, blah politically about Trump picking on NATO and so on, they don't pay enough, and Canada's included where I live. I just watched that, but I translated that as an investment into the fact that Trump was going to win the battle, obviously, because Europe is next. Russia will invade Europe if Ukraine loses. And so I started to buy. I'm not a big investor, but I bought companies in Germany that are involved in the military defense area. And, those are winners. I think Japan was also another thing. Japan is going to have to gear up. That's another thing. I also didn't believe that Taiwan was a problem. I still don't think Taiwan's a problem. Why? Because, again, facts to me rule my decision-making or my perceptions. I have friends in Taiwan who say that through this whole blah, 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 but when China's going to invade them, their property values have gone up. So the Taiwanese are not worried about it. Not because it's ways they've heard forever, but because it's not real. And so a lot of those kinds of things that are debated and so on have led me to it. But for the same reason, I invested in Taiwan Semiconductor, and I've made a lot of money.
It's funny, your Substack earlier this week has a heading called the Monroe Doctrine, where you're referring to what used to be the old Monroe Doctrine and riffing off that and talking about how Donald Trump is realigning the geopolitical world order. I've been saying for a while that this is obviously a highly unpredictable circumstance. And one of the things that I heard you say is that, the people follow the money and they go where the money is going. And one thing that markets don't like is political uncertainty. Could I ask you to handicap what you think of the certitude of what we can reasonably expect with regard to, for instance, we're only a week away from having the new tariffs go live, so we're told, on August 1st, and whether or not we should expect that to be a real thing or whether that might be yet another back down. And, the joke is that Trump always chickens out. Is he likely to chicken out this time, or is he going to continue to destabilize, or is he going to go through with this? What do you think?
Well, he doesn't chicken out. I mean, I've used that phrase talk. I was one of the first people I didn't coin it, but I used it. He doesn't chicken out. It's a negotiation. He starts at X, you start at Y. He says, okay, I really mean X. You go, okay, Y plus 2. And then he says, okay, X minus 1. And then on it goes. And so that's what it really is reflective of. He doesn't chicken out altogether, and he won't. The tariff strategy is quite interesting. And I know a lot of people won't agree with me, but I think it's brilliant. It's ruthless, and it's not nice to do to the trading partners. But imagine what he's done. He's harnessed the buying power of the richest country in the history of the world, and he's beating the people that want to supply it with stuff over the head, asking them for bargains in the form of tariffs. And the tariffs, are going to be paid sometimes by the country involved, but it's also going to lead potentially to some relocation of work in the United States, which is a plus. And what is a minus, of course, for American customers, if they don't boycott these countries that have tariffs on them, they're going to be paying essentially a new national sales tax to Washington.
It's funny, and we agree, by the way. I recently put out a video this past week where I was asking people whether Trump was in fact a taco or a 2D or a 2-die, which is an acronym that I've coined, which is Trump usually does it eventually. And that's what I'm hearing you say too, is that he's not really chickening out. He's negotiating, he's using leverage, and he's doing whatever he can to get whatever he thinks he can get as a best deal.
Process. I mean, there's no point in whining. I live in Canada and, all of our government did is whining about that. How can he do this to us? How can he? Well, he can and he will. Yeah. So negotiation, wake up. The problem with Canada, with a lot of countries, we don't have any business-minded people running our country. There are a bunch of, ideological lefties, and they just don't get it. And so that's very disadvantageous for a country, as opposed to Japan and South Korea, who said, oh my God, this is terrible. We thought we were friends. You were such a good ally to us. But okay, here's what we're willing to do. And they came down with all kinds of great ideas that would benefit the U.S. so they could get the tariff lowered on their stuff.
Okay, so if the tariffs of the magnitude that's being bandied about are ultimately implemented and maintained, what do you see as being the repercussions, both economically and, since you're uniquely situated, politically?
Any of the countries that have been slapped with new tariffs are very upset with Trump, and they're reeling from it. Already there has been a flow through of negative repercussions in many of the countries. I take my country, for instance, Canada. I mean, I'm American too, but in Canada, I think we're teetering on the verge of a recession as a direct result of the fact that he started with 25% and he's risen it to 35% potential tariffs. And as I say, our government is incompetent, so they're doing nothing but moaning and groaning about it instead of coming up with smart ideas in return. And it's not only about money, it's about lack of military protection in Canada, lack of border security protection in Canada, a loosey-goosey immigration system in Canada, which becomes a backdoor entry for drugs and bad people into the United States. So that's one of the underlying causes. And so what you've got is he slapped huge tariffs on our aluminum and steel industries, which probably, if implemented, will close them. He's going after the auto industry, which is 1 million jobs in Ontario alone. And he will get a lot of them because he wants to repatriate the jobs from Canada to the U.S. And by the way, the businesses that employ these people are all American companies, okay? So, they're not Canadian companies. Canadian companies don't have to do what he wants them to do, but Americans do. So, there's a full-scale example. It's created a lot of unhappiness. Canadians I think the travel to the U.S. from Canada is down about 30%. That's hurting tourism. You can't buy Kentucky bourbon in Canada because we're boycotting a lot of things officially and unofficially. So there's some bruising going on in the direction of the U.S. And, I'm down in New York on a regular basis, and I was at a play the other day, and I said to the woman, where are you from? And she said, where are you from? I said, Toronto. She said, thank you for agreeing to come down. I'm sorry what they're doing to you. I mean, this is what's going on. So it's a direct cause result. We may end up in our dollars off, our stock market's off, and we're teetering on a recession. Thank you, Mr. Trump.
Yeah, well, exactly. And ironically, I have a similar experience. I was in Peru last month on a tour with a bunch of other people. We went to Machu Picchu, and there were some Americans on the tour. And as soon as they found out I was Canadian, they came up to me to apologize for what was going on. And they were from Yuma, Arizona. It's not like they were from a border state. They were actually a border state. They're 30 kilometers from Mexico. So it's interesting.
I don't want to discount the fact that Canada's done this to itself with a terrible government by the Liberals. Since 2015, the immigration's gone crazy. We've let in a lot of undesirables. We've pruned our military. We're freeloading off the Americans in terms of military protection. Freeloading, we're not meeting our NATO commitments. There's a lot of stuff we haven't done, as well as not exploiting our resource base to the extent we could have because of some wokey ideas in Ottawa. So Canada, and in 2013, I wrote a book called Merger of the Century. I predicted this would happen for all those reasons. And I have tried to, as a columnist in the National Post and Post Media papers, to constantly hammer the Liberals, Trudeau in particular, get the military. What are you doing with the military? Why aren't you letting oil be exploited? Why are you not building, liquefied natural gas facilities on both coasts? All these things were ignored.
So a moment ago, I heard you say that there was a reasonable chance there might be a recession in Canada. What would your prognosis be with regard to the economic experience of, let's say, not only the U.S., but also Western Europe and our other allies as a result of these tariffs?
I don't follow their stock markets. I don't invest in currencies. I don't know how the euro is faring against the US dollar. But all I know is the Canadian dollar's been trimmed. Our stock market's been trimmed across the board. We are looking like a recession shortly. I would assume that depending on the extent of tariffs and the type of industries that you may have as a country, which are targeted in particular, will be whatever happens to you. And it will be negative. It's negative.
Okay, so then let's see if we can pull out our crystal ball just for a little bit for next week. If the tariffs are implemented next week, as we are told they are likely to be, do you see other nations retaliating with some sort of a tit-for-tat increase of their own? The recent election we had here in Canada had some politicians talk about that. And now politicians of pretty much all stripes are backing down from that. And the elbows up story is being changed at least a little bit. But it certainly is a possibility. In 1930, when the government of the day in the U.S. Imposed tariffs then in order to try to stave off a recession that ended up becoming a depression, other nation states around the world retaliated, and it became a full-blown trade war. Do you think we are certainly right now in the last little bit of July on the precipice of what could be a global trade war?
I don't think so. I think retaliation's stupid. I mean, people have to listen to what he's saying. Some people in Canada think, oh, well, this is just to make us weak so that he can annex the country. Well, that may be a subliminal desire on his part. But the point is, you can't retaliate. America is Canada's biggest customer, supplier, and investor. You can't shoot yourself in the foot like that. It's crazy. And it doesn't do any good anyway. And by the way, there was loose talk originally when this happened by some provincial premiers that we'd cut off electricity to American customers. And I said, okay, you want the American troops up here right away? Cut off an essential product. You want to ruin your reputation as a reliable supplier? Cut off an essential product. So the whole thing is like rhetoric and silly. I think this is a negotiation. You give, you take. It's not going to be unreasonable on either side, I hope. And retaliation is not going on. I don't know of any other country that's actually retaliated. And if they have, I think they're shooting themselves in the foot.
I tend to agree, but I'm still not clear now as to where the negotiation stops. So at some point, you have to say, even if I accept your thesis, and I don't dispute it, that this is a negotiation, at some point, you would have to think, as you have said, Trump doesn't really chicken out. He's negotiating, but at some point, you actually have to follow through with your end of the bargain and impose the tariffs. You can't kick the can down the road indefinitely. At some point, the tariffs are actually going to be applied. So I guess my question to you is, in your opinion, will tariffs be applied to a number of countries around the world on August 1st?
He can kick the can down the road and keep the pressure on. I mean, it's anxiety producing.
So your answer is no, right? So you're saying they're not going to do that.
Then what?
That they're not going to impose the tariffs on August 1st. That they're going to be delayed further.
It depends on whether they have a deal or not. It depends. It's here or there. No, he's having 90 discussions with 90 countries. Some are going to play hardball and it's going to drag out, and some are going to capitulate, or some are going to find something in the middle that both of them can live with and live happily ever after. I don't know. It really depends on a lot of things. And right now, I don't know what the horse trading talk is regarding Canada. I think we have a rookie prime minister who took over in the middle of a crisis because our other prime minister quit on us, which is unacceptable. So I don't know where we stand. However, there's a lot of goodwill between the United States and Canada still, but Canada has to stop getting off its pity party posture and say, okay, yeah, you're right about the border. You're right about immigration. You're right about our military incapacity. And this is what we're going to do about it.
So I have to ask you about Ukraine. How do you see that playing out, and what resolution do you think is likely for the wider world?
Oh, Lord. We have to all hope that it gets sorted out and that Ukraine remains as whole as it can possibly be given the circumstances. Putin now has 20% of the country. He's inching along, getting a little bit more, but the Ukrainians are amazing. And Trump has turned, and that's amazingly helpful. He's going to give them weapons and, all of that sort of thing. And the Europeans are smartening up finally, led by Germany and Britain. And they're doing something major in terms of turning their countries into fortresses with military industrial complexes and that sort of thing. As far as the specific Ukrainian tragedy, this is optimistic, Diane. I think we're at the beginning of the end of this war, okay? I think that Trump turning and pressure on Putin and his own collapsing economy at home is going to bring, and Zelensky has offered to go to the negotiating table again, which Trump is fully endorsing, may end up being just that. They may sit down again, hopefully. And the best I could hope for at this point is that they have a semi-permanent ceasefire. And if they have to lose 20%, they have to. But, this is a war of attrition, and Putin doesn't care about how many people die on his side, and Ukrainians do. And short of boots on the ground from NATO, I think it's a tough battle, and I think they've been remarkable. If it stops where it is, it's horrible, but we have to make sure that it never happens again, and that means boots on the ground for security purposes, de facto NATO membership for Ukraine, a rebuild of Ukraine, and Ukraine will, because Ukrainians are smart and talented, turn that into one of the most dynamic economies in Europe.
Okay, so anyone who reads you in your Substack on a regular basis will know that you have repeatedly pointed out that interrelationships are important. I know that goes for countries as well as for people. I'm wondering if you can talk about the interrelationships that you see that you would like to point out to people as being particularly crucial to the decision-making that we all have to face going forward in the here and now.
What's your relationship with the Trump government? That is key. Doesn't mean you give in, you capitulate, retaliate. I mean, I leave that open to their decision-making and their populaces and their governments, but he's the reality. This is the most powerful country in the history of the world from a military and economic viewpoint. And he's there, and he was duly elected, and he's not evil, in my opinion, although a lot of people think he is. And what he's doing for reasons to further enhance the power of the United States and to cut military costs for the United States, cut the trade deficit for the United States. So as long as everybody understands that this is not a bottomless pit of demands, make a deal. Just make a bloody deal. And of course, the Europeans have done a marvelous job, I think, because of the new German chancellor. And, what he's done is very interesting. He's not only fully embraced the requirement that the NATO members should all pay 5% instead of 2%, which Trump pushed them into correctly, but he's also agreed to pay for all the arms that are needed for Ukraine and buy them all from the United States. So he solved two problems in one. Number one, the NATO thing. Number two, military aid for Ukraine is not going to be borne by American taxpayers. It's going to be borne by the European taxpayers who are, by the way, the next victims. So that's just and that's fair. And it's been a messy way getting there, but nonetheless. And then, of course, they're going to become and have to become responsible for protecting their own territory, which I think is fair.
Okay, so as we head into the dog days of summer, what advice would you give to my listeners and viewers about their overall decision-making as the world is changing? The podcast is called Make Better Wealth Decisions. What sorts of things should be on people's mind as they go through their own decision-making?
I think there's a couple of things globally that really bother me, and that's Trump hinting and taunting the head of the Federal Reserve chairman, who he originally appointed. This is for crass political profit. He wants him to cut short-term interest rates to allow the U.S. government to borrow more money cheaply and all that sort of thing. But he's playing with fire. He's really playing with fire. And fortunately, the bond market, which is the currency and the currency guys, and the stock markets, and a lot of his advisors are saying, stop it already. And you can't go through with this. Because the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency is one of the major underpinnings for American prosperity. So as an investor, I want to know, before I put additional money in to the markets, any of the markets, what is going to be result over the Fed chairman taunting and threatened firing by Trump? All bets are off after that. So I think that that's the overriding concern I have, and that will affect every country in the world.
All right. That's been a really useful overview. I want to thank you for your time today, Diane. It was a real pleasure. Great to meet you virtually. And thanks for your insight. And I want to wish you all the best with your Substack and the rest of your career going forward.
Thanks a lot, John.
This podcast is not to be construed as offering specific investment advice. Please consult a qualified advisor before acting. My books, Stand Up to the Financial Services Industry and Bullshift, are available online. If you'd like to meet to discuss how the topics in this podcast affect you directly, please visit my website.